I've waited most of my life for this moment. Not for revenge, but for the truth, he said. I'm here today to speak directly to the man who changed the course of my childhood, and for years made me believe that silence was survival. You're sitting there today, older now. You look smaller than I remember. When I was a boy, you had all the power. You decided what was right, what was secret, and what would never be spoken. For a long time, I carried your actions like a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. You didn't just hurt me in a moment. You shaped the way I saw the world. I grew up believing that I was broken, that trust was dangerous, that love was something people used to get what they wanted. Even as I grew older, I didn't know how to let anyone close without fear. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I laughed when people expected me to, but inside there was always that small voice saying, "You don't deserve peace." You taught me shame before I even knew what that word meant. You taught me silence as a form of survival. But I'm here today to tell you I learned something stronger. I learned the truth doesn't die just because it's buried. Every day that I stayed quiet, I thought I was protecting myself, but really I was protecting you. That ends today. You no longer get to hide behind my silence. You no longer get to live as if what you did never happened. I used to think confronting you would make me feel small again, but it hasn't. It's made me realize that your control over me ended the moment I decided to speak your name out loud. I stand here not as the boy you once hurt, but as the man who survived him. What you took from me, I can never get back. But what I've rebuilt, my strength, my peace, my future, that belongs to me now. And no matter what happens in this courtroom, you will remember this day. The day I looked you in the eyes and you finally had to see the person you tried to destroy still standing. He was a man who cared, a man who knew your struggles, and he made you feel like you mattered. To the boys who walked into his world, Jerry Sandusky wasn't just teaching football, he was teaching them to believe in themselves. But there was another side to Jerry Sandusky, a side that happened when the stadiums went quiet, the side no one was watching. This is the story of a man who used trust as a weapon. Before we continue, subscribe if you're enjoying the story, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. It all started with something that seemed beautiful. In 1977, Jerry Sandusky founded the Second Mile, a program for at-risk youth, kids from broken homes, young boys who needed guidance, structure, someone to believe in them. And Jerry, he was perfect for it. He was the kind of man who'd put his arm around a shy kid and tell him everything was going to be okay. He was warm and approachable. Parents trusted him. Teachers trusted him. The entire state of Pennsylvania trusted him. He took boys to football games, let them meet the players, invited them to work out at Penn State's facilities, took them on camping trips. He became part of their lives, and he became the mentor they'd never had. Some of these boys didn't have fathers, and here was a man who played a fatherly role in their life. He was a famous coach. Everyone respected him, so getting such treatment from such a man made them feel special and made them feel they mattered. But something else was happening too, something the boys didn't have words for yet. Sandusky was always too close, always touching. Have them hugs that made them feel uncomfortable. He'd take them to the showers after workouts, insist on it. He'd say it was part of the routine of being an athlete. And then, when they were alone, when the water was running and no one else was around, he'd get closer. The boys didn't know what to do. This was a man everyone's parents felt honored that he'd taken interest in their sons. Who would believe them if they said something felt wrong? So they stayed quiet. And Jerry Sandusky kept coaching, kept winning. He kept smiling for the cameras. Something unexpected happened in 1999. Sandusky retired as a coach at just 55 years old. Everyone was shocked to hear the news. Parents tried asking why he retired, but the official story was simple. He said he just wanted more time for the second mile. He said he needed more time to help kids. But before he retired, 1 year ago, there had been a moment when everything almost came apart. A mother called the police. She said her 11-year-old son had come home upset. He'd been at Penn State with Jerry Sandusky, working out, and then they'd showered together. The boy said the coach had hugged him. The boy didn't understand what had happened, but he knew it felt wrong. The mother knew immediately. She called Penn State Police. They opened an investigation. Child welfare got involved. And then she did something brave. She agreed to wear a wire. She invited Sandusky to her home and confronted him while investigators listened to every word. When the woman was talking to Sandusky, he said that he was wrong and that he knows he wouldn't get forgiveness. When she asked if he'd touched her son's genitals, he said, "I don't think so, maybe." It was a confession, on tape, but Jerry Sandusky was never charged. The district attorney reviewed the evidence and decided not to prosecute. Child welfare closed their investigation, no consequences, and they allowed Jerry Sandusky walk away. The mother and her son were left with nothing but the knowledge that the man who'd violated this child was still free, still working with other children. Penn State knew about the investigation. Well, the only action they took was that Sandusky was told not to bring second-mile kids to campus anymore.
March 1st, 2002. It was a Friday night. Most of the Penn State staff had gone home for the weekend. Mike McCurry, a graduate assistant, stopped by the Lash football building to drop off some papers. The building was quiet. Then he heard something. He walked toward the showers, and what he saw in those next few seconds would haunt him for the rest of his life. Jerry Sandusky was with a young boy who looked about 10 years old. Mike McCurry froze. He didn't call the police. He didn't intervene. He just made eye contact with Sandusky and left. The next day, he told the legendary coach what he'd witnessed. The legendary coach then told him he'd done the right thing by coming forward, that he'd handle it from here. He reported it to his superiors. They held a meeting with McCurry about a week later. They took notes, said they'd look into it. And then, nothing. No police report, no investigation. The boy in that shower was never identified, and the abuse continued. The boys he chose all had something in common. They were vulnerable, isolated, desperate for attention. Many came from single-parent homes or foster care. They were the kids other people overlooked, the ones who felt invisible. And Jerry Sandusky made them feel seen. He'd identify a boy who seemed lonely, struggling. He'd befriend him slowly. Gifts at first, special attention, trips to football games where they'd sit on the sidelines. He'd introduce them to players, make them feel important, like they were part of something special. He'd take them to his house. His wife would sometimes be there, upstairs, while he took the boys to the basement. He'd suggest they work out together, then insist they shower afterward. That's when it would happen. Sometimes he'd touch them. Sometimes he'd force them to touch him. Sometimes worse. And afterward, he'd act like nothing had happened. The boys were trapped. Many didn't even understand what was happening to them. They knew something felt wrong, but this was Jerry Sandusky, a respected coach, someone their parents trusted. Some tried to resist, made excuses not to see him, avoided being alone with him. But Sandusky was persistent. He'd call their homes repeatedly, show up unannounced, guilt them into spending time with him. And if a boy seemed like he might tell, Sandusky would remind him of everything he'd done for him, all the gifts, the special experiences. He'd suggest no one would believe him anyway. After all, who was he, a troubled kid from a broken home? And who was Sandusky? a legend. Even people who saw things didn't speak up. In 2000, a janitor caught Sandusky with a young boy in the assistant coach's shower. But the janitors couldn't report it because Penn State football was too powerful. Speaking out against someone like him meant losing your job. So they stayed silent. And Jerry Sandusky kept hunting. For years, nothing stopped him. But in 2008, something shifted. One of his victims, now a teenager, finally had the courage to tell someone. He went to his mother and told her what Jerry Sandusky had been doing to him for years. The abuse had started when he was 11. Sandusky had met him through the second mile, befriended him, groomed him, then assaulted him repeatedly. His mother did exactly what she should have done. She called the school called the police. And this time, the report landed on the desk of someone who wouldn't look away. Pennsylvania State Police Corporal Joseph Leiter began investigating. And as he dug deeper, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. This wasn't one victim. There were others, many others, a pattern stretching back decades. But investigating Jerry Sandusky wouldn't be easy, so the investigation moved slowly. One by one, victims came forward. Young men now, carrying the trauma of what Sandusky had done to them throughout their childhoods. Talking about it meant reliving the worst moments of their lives. But they did it anyway, because they wanted him stopped. In early 2011, investigators prepared to bring charges. But they had another question. Who at Penn State knew about this? And why had no one stopped it? A grand jury began hearing testimony. What they found was devastating. Penn State officials had known. They'd been aware of the 1998 investigation. They'd been told about the 2002 shower incident. They'd collectively decided not to report Sandusky to authorities. They'd chosen to protect the university's reputation over the safety of children. On November 4, 2011, the grand jury presentment was unsealed. Jerry Sandusky was arrested and charged with 40 counts of sexual abuse involving 8 boys over 15 years. The trial began in June 2012. The Center County Courthouse in Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, just miles from Penn State's campus. Media from around the world descended on the small town, and one by one, Sandusky's victims took the stand. Their testimony was heartbreaking. The first victim started,
"I've waited most of my life for this moment, not for revenge, but for the truth," he said. "I'm here today to speak directly to the man who changed the course of my childhood, and for years made me believe that silence was survival. You're sitting there today, older now. You look smaller than I remember. When I was a boy, you had all the power. You decided what was right, what was secret, and what would never be spoken. For a long time, I carried your actions like a shadow that followed me everywhere I went. You didn't just hurt me in a moment. You shaped the way I saw the world. I grew up believing that I was broken, that trust was dangerous, that love was something people used to get what they wanted. Even as I grew older, I didn't know how to let anyone close without fear. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I laughed when people expected me to. But inside, there was always that small voice saying, 'You don't deserve peace.'" Another victim who had lived in Sandusky's home as a foster child, he testified to more than 100 incidents of abuse. He described how Sandusky had told him, "I'm the only one who cares about you. Nobody else cares." It was psychological manipulation at its most cruel. Another victim was the boy from the 1998 incident. Now an adult, he testified that the abuse had continued even after that investigation, even after Sandusky had been caught, even after he'd admitted wrongdoing on tape. Each story had unique details, but the pattern was always the same. Identify vulnerable boys, gain their trust, groom them with gifts and attention, then
abuse them. And he ensured he used his reputation so no one would believe them if they told. Sandusky's defense was disturbing in its own right. His attorney tried to argue that Sandusky's behavior had been misunderstood, that he was simply affectionate and his nature had been misconstrued. They suggested the victims were lying, motivated by potential lawsuits. But it fell apart immediately. The victims' stories were too consistent, too detailed, too obviously traumatic to be fabrications. And then Sandusky made a risky decision. He testified in his own defense. It backfired spectacularly. On the stand, he was evasive, defensive, at times bizarrely inappropriate. He admitted showering with boys and physical contact, but insisted it was innocent. He claimed he was touchy-feely and had been misunderstood. The prosecution tore him apart. They pointed to his own admissions in the 1998 recorded conversation, saying he wished he were dead, that what he'd done was wrong. Sandusky had no good answers. The jury saw through him completely. The trial lasted 10 days. On June 22, 2012, after deliberating for about 21 hours, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed. Survivors sat in the gallery waiting. Jerry Sandusky was escorted in. The man who'd once been cheered by thousands now looked small and diminished. The judge asked the jury foreperson to read the verdicts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. On 45 of 48 counts, Jerry Sandusky was found guilty of sexual abuse. The courtroom erupted. Survivors wept. Years of carrying this burden, wondering if anyone would believe them, fearing he'd escape justice. It all came flooding out. Jerry Sandusky showed no emotion. He was immediately taken into custody. 3 months later, survivors were given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing. Their statements were powerful and devastating. One said, "I will not have my life defined by the actions of Jerry Sandusky. He broke my heart and betrayed my trust, but he will not define me." Another spoke about stolen childhood, about nightmares and flashbacks, about struggling to trust anyone, about shame carried for years. They hoped that by coming forward, they might prevent other children from experiencing what they had. Judge John Cleland listened to every word. Then he addressed Sandusky directly. He noted that Sandusky had shown no remorse, that he'd maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, that he'd tried to blame the victims. The judge made it clear this man was a predator who'd used his position to prey on vulnerable children. Then he handed down the sentence, 30 to 60 years in prison. At 68 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. Jerry Sandusky would spend the rest of his days behind bars. While Sandusky faced justice, Penn State faced a reckoning. How did this happen? How did an institution that prided itself on integrity allow a predator to operate for over a decade? The NCAA launched an investigation and in July 2012 handed down unprecedented sanctions, a $60 million fine, a 4-year postseason ban, scholarship reductions. Penn State also faced civil lawsuits from survivors, ultimately reaching settlements with 36 victims, paying out more than $109 million. But no amount of money could undo the trauma. But the lawsuits forced Penn State to publicly acknowledge its failures and implement reforms. The Second Mile couldn't survive the revelations. Donations dried up immediately. Sponsors withdrew. The organization's reputation was destroyed. How could parents trust a charity that had allowed its founder to abuse the very children it was supposed to protect? In 2012, the Second Mile announced it would shut down. The charity Jerry Sandusky had created that had given him access to vulnerable children for decades collapsed under the weight of what he'd done. Today, Jerry Sandusky sits in a Pennsylvania prison. He's appealed his conviction multiple times. Each appeal has been denied. He maintains his innocence even now, even after everything. The survivors he abused have moved forward with their lives as best they can. Some have become advocates for abuse survivors. Some have struggled with addiction, relationships, mental health. All of them carry scars from what Jerry Sandusky did to them. Penn State has worked to rebuild its reputation, new leadership, new protocols, a commitment to never let something like this happen again. But the stain remains. Because this wasn't just about one man's crimes. It was about an entire system that chose reputation over children, that valued wins over welfare, that looked the other way because speaking up felt too hard, too risky, too damaging to something they'd built. But in the end, Penn State learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Jerry Sandusky used trust as a weapon. He identified the most vulnerable children, the ones society had already failed, and he failed them again. He built relationships with them, made them feel special, then violated them in ways they'd carry for the rest of their lives. And he did it for decades, protected by a culture that valued reputation over truth, loyalty over justice, silence over screams. The boys he abused trusted him. Their parents trusted him. Penn State trusted him. And that trust became the very thing he used to destroy them. This is what makes his crimes so especially cruel. He didn't just abuse children. He weaponized kindness. He turned mentorship into a hunting ground. He made goodness itself feel dangerous. And that's a betrayal that echoes far beyond the crimes themselves. Thanks for watching. This was a difficult story to tell, but an important one. If this video moved you, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people can hear these stories. What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I love hearing from you all around the world. Take care of yourselves. And remember, speaking truth, even when it's painful, is how we protect the next generation. See you in the next video.